What a win that was. Newcastle United beat Everton 4-1 at the Hill Dickinson Stadium last night thanks to 2 goals from Malik Chow, one from Nick Voltemade and one from Louis Miley. It was a fantastic performance. It was a needed performance after so much has gone wrong on the road for so long. In this video we're going to be analysing what went right this time against what went wrong in the previous games, so let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel, welcome back to another video. Welcome to the first away review of a Premier League game since April. A huge victory for Newcastle, a huge performance, and they were on it from minute one. Literally, Malik Chow scoring from a corner which came from an Anthony Elanga shot within the first few seconds. Newcastle were at it from the very start. Apologies that I have been away for a few days. I was on holiday in Edinburgh last week, so I missed the Marseille game, didn't review it, didn't preview it really. I am back with more content coming over December. Such a packed schedule, as we know. Spurs to come on Tuesday, and now everything feels a lot better, doesn't it? Everyone feels a lot better at the Premier League season. Obviously, Sunderland are coming up as well, Burnley in the league. There are a few really crucial games in December, and you can subscribe and join me on Patreon for more content around all of those games and much more coming up over the next few weeks. So do get involved if you haven't already with the link in the description for Patreon, or just click like and subscribe if you haven't already. But as I said at the top of the video, Newcastle were right at it from the very start. Anthony Elanga was in as one of 6 changes, and it was his best Newcastle performance in the Premier League for me. He was really involved. I think he was involved in 3 of the goals. Obviously laid on the assist for Voltemade as well. His best performance since Union Saint-Gilloise away in the Champions League. And what made this one so good was Newcastle's use of space. And you can say, yes, that Everton didn't defend well. The 3rd goal for Voltemade really does sum that up. And their heads were down from the first minute because Chow opened the scoring with that first header. But Newcastle put the pressure on. You know, that's the thing. Against Marseille, against Brentford and against West Ham, they took the lead early on and they didn't go for the jugular. They didn't continue the pressure. They stepped off, allowed the momentum shift to come from the home team, made their own mistakes as well. Nick Pope was one of those changes. Obviously had a groin injury, so wasn't in the squad, but Aaron Ramsdale came back in, and we'll talk about him later in the video. But I thought Newcastle, the big difference was that they went for the jugular from a position of strength. That's what they've not done in those 3 away games, and they've continued to press and they continue to push, and their possession was so much crisper in terms of their passing, but also much more purposeful. They meant to do something with every pass. They weren't just passing for the sake of it and just to keep possession. But there were spells in the game where Everton came back and Jack Grealish got on the ball. Again, we'll talk about him and Tino Livramento. The impact that Tino and Hall again made on the team in terms of their overall energy levels, overall coverage of the pitch. There's so much to really talk about, but as I say, it stemmed from Newcastle's purpose. It stemmed from Newcastle's ability to rise and fall with the game a little bit. And there were spells in that first half, I think, which are as crucial as when they're on top. When Everton had the ball and Everton were pressing and Everton had a couple of carved out half opportunities, they didn't really create too much. They obviously scored in the second half and had a goal rightfully disallowed from Tierno Barry for a handball. But there wasn't a moment in the game really where you feared that Everton were going to come back into the game at any stage, because Newcastle managed their spells without the ball really well in the main, at least. Because in the second half, when I think the goal went in and then Dewsbury Hall scored to pull it back, there was a little bit of complacency, but Newcastle were already 4-0 up at that stage. So they needed to reassert themselves, and they did that really well. And I think that was what, for me, was the defining thing, was Newcastle were so much more comfortable, so much more confident with the ebbs and flows of the game, because you saw at West Ham, you saw at Brentford, and particularly in that second half against Marseille. Again, these were all punctuated by mistakes by Nick Pope, who wasn't there, but all of those games had this moment where West Ham, Brentford and Marseille stepped it up, came back out, came back fighting, and Newcastle didn't have an answer for it and they capitulated in those moments. There was none of that in this game. Despite 6 changes, despite no Sandro Tonali, despite Anthony Elanga coming in off the back of some really difficult performances, it's been a tough spell for him early on in his Newcastle career. But Nick Voldemade picked up from where he left off against Man City. He was much more effective in behind, but also his link-up play again, absolutely phenomenal. It's not just his technique and his touch, but it's his ability to hold the ball up. The ball can just be randomly pumped up the pitch and it can end up at his feet. He's got magnets for feet in that sense. And there was something I think that summed up Newcastle and summed up Nick Voldemade on Instagram after the game. Malik Chow commented on Nick Voldemade's Instagram post saying, "Streets will not forget" kind of player. And I think that really beautifully sums up what Voldemade is about. Lovely finish as well. But link-up play for the chance that led to the first goal from Elanga, from just general play as well, absolutely phenomenal. He really is becoming that real focal point for Newcastle, and it's been a slow growth in certain ways, even though he scored 7 goals in 16 games, and that's a really impressive start. There have been questions about how the wingers are going to combine, how he links and how he gets in the box enough, and whether that's going to be an issue. And it has been an issue at different times this season, but in the last 2 games in the league, Man City and Everton, that was less of an issue. Newcastle have looked much more connected in attack. Harvey Barnes was again excellent. The real difference makers are Hall and Livramento for similar reasons that I said last week. Hall more on the attacking side, Livramento more on the defensive side. Both do brilliant jobs in both departments, but I think Livramento defined the game by really shutting down Grealish. Grealish had a lot of the ball, he was looked for quite a lot of the time, but he never really got central. He was always kept out wide. Miley and Joe Linton came and helped the fullbacks a lot. There was a lot of compactness in defence. I think Dan Burn was phenomenal. Obviously there was no Sven Botman, which is a shame. Malik Chow got the headlines for his 2 goals and man of the match, but again, possession, positioning, calmness, absolutely imperious performance from him once again. And I think that is really where it stemmed from. Newcastle were compact and confident on the ball. Miley was phenomenal in midfield, replacing Sandro Tonali, which is no mean feat because Newcastle have not really performed well historically without both Tonali and Bruno in the midfield together. Miley has obviously had a lot of criticism at times this season off the back of that performance at Bournemouth, which I lambasted the criticism of from a few weeks ago, but he really bounced back and he was absolutely phenomenal in this game. I thought he, for me, was probably the unsung hero because yes, Chow got the headlines, yes, Voldemade again got the headlines because of his goal, yes, Anthony Elanga was more involved and deserves huge credit, but Miley made such a difference in midfield because, as I say, one of the defining things was the ability to get the ball forward, and every pass was purposeful. Every pass had a point to it. Newcastle were looking to do something to exploit the space, but they created the space themselves. Yes, Everton were poor defensively. Yes, they let Newcastle in. Jordan Pickford made a couple of mistakes. All of these things happened, but they happened because Newcastle imposed themselves. That's the difference. This has got to be a blueprint performance because it came from what Newcastle did to Everton first. I think David Moyes said after the game, Newcastle were too powerful, they couldn't be handled. I think he might have even said that they are the most powerful team in the Premier League, and that's almost what's really frustrating about this, because this is what Newcastle can be away from home, but they just don't have the mentality all the time and the confidence levels to do it consistently, and that is a big problem going forward, especially with the Tyne-Wear derby coming up at the Stadium of Light in a couple of weeks. But we have to talk about Nick Pope coming out for Aaron Ramsdale. The confidence in possession, the difference with the ball at his feet, and that what that does to the defence, I think, is really crucial, was massive. Obviously, the big thing is the mistakes, and those mistakes have led to the defeats against West Ham, against Brentford, and against Marseille. So I think this is the point where Ramsdale maybe does take over, and it's maybe not going to be permanent, but it's one of those things, a little bit like Cher coming out for Chow because of his injury. It's now impossible to see Cher usurping that position from Chow, despite regardless of what he does, because Chow is that good. That's the opportunity that Ramsdale has, and it's been a really solid start to his Newcastle career with the opportunities he's had. Great save against Spurs in the Carabao Cup, and he didn't really have too much to do in this game, but he was absolutely brilliant overall when he was needed to be. And as I say, the possession difference, the ability to raise Newcastle up the pitch, the confidence that the defence had in that as well, which I think you can tell that nobody is confident when Nick Pope has the ball at his feet, least of all Nick Pope, and I think that is really an issue. But again, Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall, the difference that they make, because they can get Newcastle at the pitch in both directions defensively and in attack as well. I said all of this against Manchester City. We didn't learn anything new in that sense, but I think we learned some new stuff about Anthony Elanga. As I say, he looked much more purposeful. Maybe needs to bulk up a bit more again, still continuing that work, but much more confident, much more used to the space a lot better, much more direct and sort of playing to his strengths a lot more. Nick Voltemada, again, always around the ball, always where he needed to be, which has not been the case in every game, particularly away from home in recent weeks. And this can be a real springboard now. Newcastle have 2 home games this week against Spurs, who obviously lost to Fulham yesterday, and the pressure is growing on Thomas Frank a little bit from the fans. And then obviously Burnley, which is a must-win game, going into Bayer Leverkusen in the Champions League, which now takes on a little bit of a different sort of sense of feeling because of the defeat against Marseille, and they are obviously in good form as well. That's going to be a really tough game in Germany in about 10 days' time, and then obviously the derby coming up too. But this is a real crucial moment. I think Newcastle can take confidence from this result going into this month that can really turn the season. You'll get the sense, as you did last year, with December being so crucial, what happens? It started that winning run, the game against Leicester, the game against Ipswich, the game against Villa, Manchester United. There was a string of wins that really became the bedrock of the season, the springboard that allowed Newcastle to go and attack, win the cup, and also get back in the Champions League. That is the sort of thing that's on the horizon now, and Newcastle have gone into it with a blueprint performance. That's what this is. It's a blueprint performance. This is the way that they should attack every single Premier League game away from home if they can, because they started fast and got faster. They started intense and got more intense. That was what they did, whereas in the previous games against West Ham and Brentford and Marseille in the Champions League as well, they started well and dwindled and allowed the opposition to dictate and didn't have an answer when they hit the front. Everton did hit the front a couple of times. That's the crucial thing. That's what I'm saying. In the first half, they had possession. They did push Newcastle back, but Newcastle were confident and calm and compact and just regained the control. They had a little bit of a lapse of concentration second half and then just reset themselves and went back into their positions and then got over the line for the victory. So a huge result for Newcastle. Much more to come. I'll be at Spurs on Tuesday to give a reaction to that. I'm hoping to do a preview tomorrow, but I am very busy at the moment. I do apologise for the lack of content over the last few weeks, and the Patreon stuff isn't quite clicking the way I would like it to, but I am working on that. Do join me with the link in the description, and I'll see you next time for a video. I'll be, as I say, at Spurs for a reaction, but hopefully we'll be back for a preview of that as well. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.